Unexpectedly, I started the game by losing my father because long ago the world was filled with many cruel and terrifying beings who committed atrocities and destroyed everything. And there was a boy named Tautaro who specifically crossed the sea to slay ghosts. Tautaro alone eliminated numerous enemies, but the war between both sides lasted thousands of years, each breeding descendants until today. Those with ghost-slaying powers, the Tautaro descendants, formed an organization. The descendants of the ghosts, fearing being hunted, could only blend into the crowd. The protagonist was born with the bloodline of ghosts. The father was gravely wounded trying to protect the protagonist, who instantly blackened and awakened his bloodline. Many years ago, the foster father was also one of Tautaro, but he couldn't bear to kill the protagonist who was still an infant, so he defected and raised him alone. The grown-up protagonist was just expelled for fighting. Although the family sold firewood, the protagonist loved all kinds of fire sticks. Dissatisfied with his dull life, he even felt lucky not to have the foster father's bloodline, unaware the foster father had just gone out to deliver fire. Outside the window, a thick fog suddenly appeared on the street, and a strange tentacle forcefully dragged the protagonist out of the room. When he came to, a ferocious man in white appeared before him. Unexpectedly, the next moment the foster father stopped and crashed into the man, urging the protagonist to get into the car quickly. The protagonist was stunned, thinking maybe the family owed loan sharks, but not enough to kill someone. Little did he know the man was not dead. The foster father, realizing he couldn't hide the truth, confessed that the protagonist had inherited the ghost bloodline and the man just now had inherited Tautaro's bloodline. To prove his words, the car roof was suddenly pierced by a black blade. Seeing the car about to be covered in black fog, the foster father slammed the brakes, throwing the protagonist out of the seat. The car exploded on the spot. When the protagonist regained consciousness, he had vanished. The foster father noticed the black fog entering a nearby warehouse. The protagonist was like prey caught in a pig net because for humans, the ghost descendants were like pests. The Tautaro organization specializes in exterminating pests. The foster father appeared to tell the legend of Tautaro and ghosts, all true. The descendants bred and fought continuously. Then the foster father also summoned black mountain-breaking weapons to fight, but after many years without battle, he was no longer a match for the opponent. Seeing the foster father unwilling to give up, the opponent couldn't understand why someone with the Tautaro wolf bloodline would protect a ghost. However, he was protecting not a ghost but his beloved son. Just as the opponent was about to strike the foster father, the protagonist, angry at his helplessness, felt his killing intent boiling. At this moment, the protagonist finally awakened the ghost bloodline, transforming into a monster. Ghosts could not only control blood in combat but also had extreme regenerative abilities. Most terrifying was the frenzy and self-destruction. The protagonist controlled his blood to form various guns and RPGs, suppressing the opponent with dense gunfire. However, the opponent still escaped the attack, while the protagonist regained clarity and exited the frenzy state. Confused by memory loss and bodily changes, the protagonist was in chaos. Seeing this, the opponent thought it a good chance to finish him off, but the foster father once again stood up to block the attack, willing to die protecting his son. As curious onlookers appeared around, the opponent had to temporarily abort the mission and leave. The foster father, as usual, left a message urging the protagonist to grow stronger, strong enough not to lose to Tautaro or the ghost bloodline inside him. This was a pact between men. The protagonist chose to interrupt the spell, believing if he ignored the message, the foster father wouldn't die. Unfortunately, reality was harsh, and the foster father was fatally wounded. Just as the protagonist grieved, suddenly a man named Wuren appeared behind him. Before he could react, he was knocked unconscious. Meanwhile, several mummies inside the Tautaro organization learned of the April Rain operation's failure. Since they must operate covertly, there was no need for ordinary people to know about the ghost's existence. The priority was to eliminate the protagonist before his full awakening. Upon regaining consciousness, the protagonist found himself restrained in an unfamiliar room where an elder claiming to be Wuren said the protagonist was also a ghost. As for where they were, the protagonist was not qualified to know. The foster father's body was stored elsewhere, and now the protagonist was being tested. Skateboards can move quickly and more efficiently. The man who previously controlled Black Fog was Tautaro. More precisely, they all inherited Tautaro bloodlines dedicated to exterminating ghosts. To counter them, ghosts established their own organization. He was searching for ghosts like the protagonist who just awakened and was responsible for testing if they qualified to join the ghost organization. The protagonist forced himself to calm down, only wanting to avenge his father quickly. The other was speechless. The protagonist was courting death, and he had a suitable test method for those wanting to die. He immediately used his tie to strangle the protagonist's neck. The protagonist had to find a way out to survive but soon went still, just when no one expected the protagonist to survive. So that's how it is. You're really troubled but very strong. I'll tell you one thing, let me be your captain. Unexpectedly, Wirin refused. Fighting without thinking is a dead end and the protagonist was easy to lose control. The protagonist knelt down saying, "I'm a man and I knelt. What more do you want?" Wirin planned to deal with him on the spot and deliberately cut his finger to demonstrate how to control the ghost blood. The protagonist immediately understood and rubbed his fist on the ground, rushing at Wirin. Wirin immediately thought of 4 possibilities for the protagonist. 1. Recklessly charging. 2. Attacking his foot. 3. Jumping to attack from above. And 4. Pretending to run away. Wirin couldn't believe it had really worked. Although the protagonist was still on the edge of losing control, he was surprisingly useful. Just as Wirin was about to execute him, the protagonist said he had not been consumed. His arm then recovered normally, confusing Wirin. The protagonist controlled his blood and suppressed the frenzy. Seeing Wirin curious about how he did it, the protagonist admitted he didn't know exactly but just copied Wirin's moves. He didn't know the method and desperately repeated weapon come out in his mind. Wirin was speechless, thinking such a silly idea could never work. The protagonist was easily carried away and hard to control rationally. The only way to control ghost blood was through emotional outbursts, not reason, purely instinct. Wirin was in a dilemma. The protagonist was unreliable but could unleash great power at crucial moments. The protagonist hoped Wirin could help him get stronger. Wouldn't that make him the useful person Wirin mentioned? However, Wirin again refused to take him as a disciple because the protagonist wanted to be his student. Only then did the protagonist realize he was in the ghost base, Ghost Island. The island had a school specifically for ghosts, teaching courses against Tao Tarot. Wirin would be his homeroom teacher. The protagonist was fearless and determined to grow stronger and avenge his father. Nothing could stop him. However, the goofy protagonist just outside the classroom was thinking about how to make a flashy entrance under the 3-colored sea. At this moment, the protagonist noticed many people already sitting in the classroom. Originally, they were to be taken on a school tour, but Wirin suddenly changed his mind. Since they were all ghosts, they would play a thrilling game of tag. 7 were taken to the forest at the island's corner and had to return to school within an hour without being caught. If everyone was caught, the game ended. Those who didn't reach the finish line would be expelled, since after graduation they must go to the front line to fight Tao Tarot, risking their lives. To be fair, Wirin wouldn't use ghost blood, but the freshman could use any means. The arrogant blonde looking down on him was at risk. Wirin was intolerant and said if he could kill the blonde, he would graduate immediately and freely choose his unit. Everyone was eager, but the protagonist worried if he could really do it. Seems like one person is different. Can he make it? Don't mess around. If a man really comes to fight me, I'm really going to fight back.